Hello, welcome to this Excel VBA video. Now, occasionally in my work, I get an example of Excel VBA that I think I've just got to show this to people because it really captures what we're trying to say on the channel, which is if you learn just a little bit of code, you can save yourself a huge amount of time. Let's get straight into this demo file. Now, this file is an example from my work, and this example is to do with human resources. What we've got here is shift time. So these are the lengths of people's shifts, and you can see we've got 5:15 here. That means 5 hours 15 minutes, 8 hours 15 minutes, etc., etc. We're looking to convert these minute values into decimal values. So 8 hours 15 minutes would be 8.25. That's eight hours and a quarter. 7 hours 45 minutes would become 7.75, which represents 3/4 of an hour in kind of decimal terms. So this kind of task could be super frustrating if you're having to do it manually. And I know out there's lots of people doing things like this and similar, spending a lot of time that they really could save using a little bit of Excel VBA. Let's get the Visual Basic Editor involved here. Now, fans of the channel are going to recognize a lot of these techniques because it really is the same stuff that you've seen in other videos, but you know, it works so well, that's why we use it. So what have we got? Got some variable declarations at the top. A variable is a place to store information. We can store some information there, quickly extract it, use it in our code really efficiently. Got different types of variables here that we're going to talk about: range, integer, and a single variable, two single variables. And then what's this? We've got for each and next, which means we've got a loop. So we've got a loop in the code too. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to do the same thing multiple times. We're trying to do that minute to decimal conversion multiple times. Trying to do something multiple times, a repeated set of instructions, that means a loop. Conceptually, we know we're going to need a loop there. In this case, we've got a for each loop. We're going to talk about that in more detail. Then the third main ingredient, if you like, we've got this conditional statement using select case. And a conditional statement, we're saying to Excel, if this condition is met, so if this is happening in the spreadsheet, I want you to do that. If another condition is met, I want you to do that. So we're kind of setting the code off in one of multiple different directions. So we've got three main ingredients there: variables, a loop, and a conditional statement combining together. And if you read the blog article that goes with this article, that goes with this video, combining those together, we get super powerful routines that get things done. So this is kind of the basic idea, and for the rest of the video I'm going to rebuild the code. So hopefully we've built some motivation. We're going to go through the code step by step and rebuild it. So I'm in the Visual Basic Editor now. All I'm going to do is rebuild this routine below the existing routine. So let's start the routine. I'm going to say sub convert min deck, something like that. Of course, we can call routines anything, but it's a good idea to give them informative variable names. So from the name, an informative name rather, so from the name of the routine, we can understand what the routine does. And then it's important at this stage to kind of take a step back and think conceptually, what are we trying to do in this routine? We've got to get that conceptual understanding clear before we get into the technical stuff. A real problem people have with Excel and VBA is they think, oh, I don't have the technical understanding, I don't know the code, I don't understand the formulae. More often it's actually a conceptual problem. So we've got to make it clear in our heads, speaking in English or in your native language, what you're trying to do. Then we can get onto the more difficult technical stuff. So what are we trying to do? Well, we want to loop through these cells. We want to go through each cell to perform an action, which means we're going to need a loop. So that's something we can put in straight away. And with this loop, and with most loops, you're going to need a variable. And in this case, we're going to use a range variable because we're working with cells. So we're just saying to Excel, we need a little bit of your memory to store some details about the cell. That's what we're doing with the variable declaration there, dim Chris Sellers range. You'll notice again, I've given the variable here an informative name, so I know from the name of the variable roughly what it does. And then we're going to say for each Chris cell in range. And then we've got to think about, you know, what is the range that we're working with. Now you can see from the download file, remember the file is available to download on the website, so you can work along with me. You can see from the download file, we're going from B3 all the way down to 1002, B1002. So how are we going to configure this range? Well, we can just say B3 to B1002. This will work absolutely fine. And then we're going to close the brackets and just close the loop by saying next Chris cell. So we open the loop with the for each command and then close it with next. It's a good idea to close the loop before doing any more coding so you don't forget to close the loop later. That can get very confusing. So when you open the loop, close it at the same time. Okay, so this will work absolutely fine, but fans of the channel will know that we can do better than this. We should be aiming to do better than this. This is what we'd call a static reference. And what are the drawbacks of a static reference? Well, if somebody were to edit this list in some way, take some entries off the bottom of the list, or more likely, add entries to the bottom of the list. If somebody were to do that, then this code, because it refers to this static range, it wouldn't quite work anymore. It would miss some of the entries out, or it might try to do operations on cells with no data in. So we want to move from a static to a dynamic solution that's going to work, that's going to be dynamic and going to work as the database gets bigger. It's still going to work. So how are we going to do that? We want to say to Excel, for this range of cells, start on B3 and then to the bottom of that list. We're going to assume there's no gaps in the list. To the bottom of that list. If we can say that, then no matter how big the list gets, the code should work in theory anyway. So how do we do this? Well, we're going to say sheets1.range. I'm just using the index number for the sheet. You could, of course, use the sheet name. And then how do we get this kind of dynamic referencing going on? Well, we use what I call range. So range, and then the top of the range and the bottom of the range. That's the setup we use. I'm going to use an underscore here so I can move on to the next line. Sheets1 range. So this is the top of the range, and I can see, well, it's B3, and we can safely assume, that that's not going to change. So we can hard code that in. B3. So range. We've got the first two components. Range. Now we've got to think about the last component here, and I'm just going to copy paste what I've got. Good to recycle things that we know work. And then this is kind of the magic. This might be the bit you're not familiar with. Super powerful bit of VBA coding. We're going to say end, and then in brackets Excel down, and then two brackets at the end there. So what does this mean? We're saying to Excel, well, I want you to work with a whole range, a continuous range, and the range is going to start at B3 and then just go down until you get to the next empty cell. Keep going until you get to the next empty cell. Now you'll note that if there is an empty cell here, then Excel is only going to work until it gets to the next empty cell. And let's illustrate this. Let's do a quick test. I'm going to take this code and I'm going to tell Excel just to select this range. With testing, it's a good idea to do testing, just in your screenshot there, it's a good idea to do testing as you go along, rather than building it all and thinking, I don't know if this is working, trying to test it all at the end. Good idea to build it step by step, test it as you go along. That way we can build confidence in the code. So I'm going to step into the code here using the F8 key. You can, of course, go to debug and hit step into. I'm on a Windows PC, I can use the F8 key. What am I expecting to happen here? Well, let's give it a test. We can see that Excel has selected this range to the next empty cell. Now that is what I expected to happen. I'm going to put this value back in here, so this will be 7.45. And now rerun, resets, and step into the code again. And what happens? Well, Excel has now selected the whole range. I could go down and check that, but it's a little bit complicated with the screenshot doing the scrolling. But I've done my test just with a few cells there. I'm satisfied that's accurate. So I can now actually remove this code because it's the same, exactly the same as the code I've included at the top of the loop there. So already just coding for a few seconds really, or a couple of minutes, but I've been talking away. We've got a really powerful mechanism here. We've got a loop. We're telling Excel to go through all these cells and perform a certain command. So next we've got to think, what do we want Excel to do? Now this is a good idea, again, to get away from the VBA editor. Just look at the spreadsheet and literally speak out loud. This is what I do when I'm doing programming, to get it clear in my head. Speak out loud, you know, what we're trying to do. So what do we need to do? Well, we're really interested in the minutes portion here. So 10, 15, we want to take that 15 and convert it to 25. We want to take this 45 and convert it to 75. We want to take this 30 and convert it to 50. So we're actually interested in just the minutes portion. So the last two digits, if you like, of the values in column B. So we want to think about how can we isolate that information, just the last two digits, store it somewhere, and then convert it to the decimal time. So for example, convert 15 to 25. So we want to take a bit of information and store it. So fans of the channel will be thinking, well, we need something to do that. So let's use a variable, which is a place to store information. And let's say minutes portion, min, let's just say min portion. There we go. What kind of variable do we want here? You might want to stop the video and think about this. Well, we're familiar with the range variable we've got there. We use integer variables a lot as well. In this case, an integer variable wouldn't work. An integer is going to work for whole numbers, and it might take our value and try to round it up to a whole number, or it might just not work at all. So we need a variable capable of dealing with decimals, holding decimal information. A single variable is capable of doing that. So for working with decimals, just going to put an annotation there with decimal. So hopefully we're going to be able to store just the minute portion of the value in there. Okay, so I'm going to take the variable and we're going to use a line of code here, which is going to be chriscell.value, chriscell, there we go, dot value minus, and then we're going to use the VBA integer command, which is int chriscell dot value. Okay, now I have done a bit of preparation for this video, so I kind of knew this was coming, this line of code, but it might look a bit curious if you're not familiar to VBA. But what is this line of code actually doing? Well, to find out, let's step into the code again. And then I'm going to step through this line of code. Now, min portion is now 0.15. That's because it's taken the first cell and we've managed to isolate just that minute portion, which we were looking to do. How did it do that? Well, it did it by taking chriscell.value, which is 10.15, and subtracting from chriscell.value just the integer portion. And that's what this integer command here is giving us, just the integer portion. So it's taking the whole value, 10.15, and just subtracting the integer part, which is 10. So this is exactly what we want with this min portion idea. Just going to continue to test this. In fact, I'm going to save the file quickly, Control S. So for the first one, we've got 0.15. Second one, we've got 0.45. That seems to make sense in row 4. I'm going to test one more. And then we've got 0.15, so we're now in row 5. Let's see how it responds to a 0 value, so this 4.00, and that seems to be fine. We've just got a value of 0 in the variable. Okay, so this seems to be going pretty well. We've managed to loop through the cells and isolate just the minutes in the cell there. So what are we going to do next? Again, you might want to pause the video, but what we're looking to do is convert that minute portion into a decimal. 15 minutes to 0.25, 30 minutes to 0.5, etc. How might we do that? What construct, what technique do we need to do that? Well, it's going to be a conditional statement because we're asking Excel to go one of a number of ways. And I'm going to use select case here. We could use some kind of if statement as well. Select case tends to be my conditional statement of choice if it's a more complicated conditional statement. How do we set it up? Well, we say select case min portion This is the information that we're working with, that we're interested in. Now, immediately, I'm going to close the case statements, just like when we set up the loop. I immediately close the loop to avoid confusion later. Immediately close the select case statement there. Now, how do we set this up? Well, we're going to say case 0 here. Then we're going to put the other possible eventualities here. So 0.15 and 0.30. And you'll see Excel will just take the 0 off the 30 there. That's fine, that should still work. So we've got all our possible eventualities here. We can see, looking at the data, it's going to be 0, 0.15, 0.30, or 0.45. So we've got all of our eventualities there. All of these values are going to fit into one of those baskets. So we've set up the basic structure there for select case. I'm going to delete this line here, keep things compact. So we're saying to Excel, if the value is 0, this is what we want you to do. We're going to put the line of code in here. This is what we want Excel to do. If the value is 0.15, we want you to do this. If the value is 0.3, we want you to do this. So again, a bit of a critical point. We've got to think about exactly how we're going to make this mechanism work. Now, I'm going to make it work by declaring, you might want to stop the video now, think about it, try to get it to work. But we're going to have another piece of information here. And the other piece of information is going to be the decimal portion. So the 0.25, the 0.75, etc. So we've got kind of the minute portion, 0.15. Then we're going to convert that into a decimal portion. So we've got another piece of information. We want to store that somewhere. I'm going to say dec for decimal portion. And what kind of variable is this going to be? Well, we're working with a decimal, so a single variable again is most appropriate. So we've got another variable here, place to store information. And with this variable, the information I want to store is our desired decimal value. So if we've got 0 minutes, then our decimal portion, our variable for storing the decimal value, can be 0. 15 minutes, well, that's a quarter of an hour, so 0.25 in decimals. And then 0.5 here. Then finally, well, what do you think for this final value? Then 0.75. Okay, this seems to be taking shape. I'm just checking through it as I'm speaking, checking for the structure there, giving it a kind of sense check. I've opened the loop, closed the loop, opened the conditional statement, closed the conditional statement. I've got all the conditions in there. The structure seems to be fine. Looking at it, save the file, Control S on the PC. Then we're going to step through it. And what are we looking to happen? Well, for this first cell, we know from the loop that we're going to look at this first cell in row 3. We're looking to convert 15 minutes into 0.25. So this dec portion value should be 0.25. Just to make this explicit, I'm going to have a message box at the end, dec portion. There we go. So it's actually going to flash up the value of the variable just to make it nice and clear. Quick save, Control S, F8. Is this a spelling error here? Yes. So I put mag box rather than message box. Okay, message box, there we go. Okay, I'm going to step through this using the F8 key, F8, stepping into. So what are we expecting to happen here? Well, we're expecting a message box to flash up with 0.25 in. So this is the decimal portion, and this looks appropriate. The second value is 45 minutes, so that's going to convert to 0.75. And let's go through the conditional statements again. So we're expecting 0.75 to flash up. We have got 0.75. Happy with that. Let's test this next value, which is 8.15. So this should convert to 0.25, of course. And dec portion, okay. And that seems to be working well. So you can see as we're going through doing the testing, as we go through, doing a small chunk of code, testing it, this is a good way to do the testing on a kind of ongoing basis. Avoids the situation where you've got a routine that isn't working, you've got lots of code, and it's difficult to find exactly where the problem is. We get error messages from VBA, they're not always super informative. So this kind of step-by-step approach can really de-stress things for us. Good, so this seems to be going well. So we've got the integer portion of the value. We know how to get that. Then we've got the decimal portion too. So I'm going to see if I can put that together now. And let's just use another variable here. So let's say final value. Not absolutely necessary to use a variable here. We could input this directly into the cell, but I think it's going to be easier to understand. Let's say final value equals. Now, what's going to happen here? You might want to stop the video. We're looking to get this final value. So the value that's going to appear in column C, we're looking to put everything together now and generate that final value. How are we going to get that final value? Well, we need the integer portion of the initial value in column B. We need the integer portion there. So for example, just the 10, if we're thinking about column 3, then we want to pair that with the minutes portion, with the decimal portion rather. We want to pair that with the decimal portion that we've generated using our conditional statement. So again, you might want to stop the video, see how we do that. I'm going to recycle, so use some code that I know is working. I know this is going to give me the integer portion, and then I think plus is most appropriate, although it might be an and sign, but I'm going to go for a plus first, plus this dec portion here. So again, you know, just a simple line of code, a single line of code, but super powerful. What's it doing? Well, we've created this variable, and to this variable we're going to assign the following value, which is the integer portion of the value in the Chris cell. So the value in the cell is 10.15. The integer portion is going to be just 10 plus the decimal portion that we've configured up here in the select case conditional statement. Okay, so again, let's test that, and we could use a message box. I'm not going to use a message box this time. I'm just going to step through it. I'm just going to quickly delete this code up here to get your screenshot as good as it can be. I'm going to put option explicit back in there, which I think I deleted. There we go. Option explicit is important, helps us find spelling mistakes in variables, things like that. Quick save, and then let's step through the code. And we're interested in this final value variable. What do we get when we just go through the code? I'm just going to switch to an alternative setup here so you can see. There we go. And what is the value of final value? You can see that just by hovering the cursor, I've got my cursor here that you can see on your screenshot. Just going to hover the cursor over the variable. You can see the value pops up there. This is a good way to do testing. So it's saying 10.25 would be the final value. Does that look reasonable? It does look reasonable because we've got the final values here typed in, just for kind of demonstration purposes, but that does look reasonable. It's 10 and 15 minutes is 0.25 of an hour. This looks reasonable. So I'm going to continue stepping through. What are we expecting now? Well, 9.75 is the value we're expecting next. And what are we getting? 9.75. Let's do one more here. And we're getting 8.25. That looks reasonable. And let's do this 0 value. And then we've got 4, of course, because we've just got 4 hours there with no minutes attached to it. So there we've tested all of the cases apart from this where we have 30 minutes. So I'm just going to keep going through a few more. So we've got 7.75. I want to get down to this 530 value here, just to check that the where there's a 30, it's working fine. What have we got there? We've got 5.5. Okay, yeah, so we've got down to row 11, and yeah, that seems to be fine. Final value is 5.5. So I wanted to test each of these conditions. You see, wanted to test 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and 0 minutes. I've managed to do that just by stepping through, going through the loop, going through all these values at the top. So I'm happy with the testing so far. Now I'll just take a sip of water quickly. So this seems to be working well. So we've got the final value and we've assigned it to a variable, but is that going to do the job? Well, it's not going to quite do the job, is it? Because the thing about variables is they exist in the VBA editor and the user can only see them if we externalize the value of the variable explicitly. What do we want to happen? Well, it would be nice if we could replicate this structure here where we've got 2 columns, and we've got the decimals, the minutes in one column and the decimals in the other. So I'm just going to clear out the decimals now. And what would the required code be? Again, you might want to think about it yourself. So we're just looking to get this value from final value, get this value from the variable, and to get it into the spreadsheet. So how might we do that? Well, what information have we got that might help us? Well, we're working through the loop with this cell variable. And I'm going to use a line of code that exploits the information that Excel knows about the cell variable. So exploits the loop, you might say. And we're going to say sheets1 range cell dot address. Okay, so we could do this. And what would this line of code do? If we just said sheets1 cell dot address, well, this would just put the value in the same cell. So effectively would overwrite B3 there. So that's not quite what we want to do. Rather than that, I'd just like to move across one column. Yeah, move across to column C. So what do we need to do to move across? You might have seen me type in there. It's about position control. So it's another tiger favorite. And in this case, we want to move away from the original address, the original cell, by 0 rows down and by 1 column across. Okay. And then equals final value. There we go. Just checking you can see everything in your screenshot. Just about. Okay. There we go. Very good. Got all of the code in there. So yeah, close to completion now. So should we just play the code? Well, we could, but try to resist the temptation to do that. Although it's exciting, we're almost finished. Save the file, and then I would go through the loop and just do a few tests. Just test the loop a few times. This is going to avoid any catastrophic errors like getting into an infinite loop or some other kind of error being generated that's difficult to understand. You know, we can step through the loop, and if there's a problem, we can identify it and hopefully fix it. So we've got our final value being generated there, and then we can see it being put in. Very nice. Go through the next one. 9.75, that makes sense. 8.15. Yep, seems to be working well. Okay, so I'm satisfied doing that kind of manual test, that it seems to be working well. I'm just going to hit F5 now, and I can see we've worked through everything there. And just going down, I'm just looking at these values, giving it a sense check. I'm happy with these values. Okay, finally, just the icing on the cake, to use a British phrase, would be, this macro, it happens very quickly, so quick because the coding's efficient. We've used remote coding techniques there. So it happens very quickly. It'd be good to tell the user what's happened, okay? Now we've got a series on message boxes that we put up in the summer, Excel VBA message boxes for beginners you might want to look at. But let's just tell the user down the bottom here, message box, and let's say decimal values, let's say generated, and specify the type of message box, and then give it a title at the top there. As I said, we've got a series called Excel VBA message boxes for beginners, which you might want to have a look at. I've forgotten to put the speech marks in there, and there we go. Okay, good. So play the code, and it's all happened. Decimal values generated. Bring that into your screenshots. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to do a quick test here. Now what's happened here? I've put this inside the loop. Did you see that? Which is why it's going to keep going, keep flashing the message box up every time. Classic mistake. Now I got out of the loop by holding down the escape key. Holding down the escape key on the keyboard, I've now got this error, debug, and I just want to position this outside of the loop. There we go, down at the bottom there. And it just shows really, it's perfectly normal to make errors in VBA. Got to back up your file. If you're preparing, it's absolutely fine to make the errors. I still make errors, every day. But less these days but yeah, I still made them and tried to learn from them. Okay, so there we go, and I'm happy with this. Just going to change this value at the top quickly to prove it's working. 10.45, F5 to play the code, and decimal values are generated. We can see that value there has changed. Okay, so I'm happy with that example. So as I said, just a super kind of instructive example, I would say, because there's lots of people out there doing that kind of manual work, and with just a few VBA techniques. How many lines of code did we have there? Maybe 15 lines of code. We had a loop, we had some variables, we had some conditional statements. So we're not going deep and dark into really complicated code here. Some fairly simple techniques applied correctly with a steady, systematic approach, testing as you go through. It really makes so many things possible. And you know, if you're doing a task like that every day, it could save you hours per week. And it's not just about time saving though. There's a more fundamental thing going on, which you'll be more confident about data tasks and about analytical tasks more generally. So I hope that was helpful for you. Now, if you've come to the end of this video, you're clearly serious about your Excel VBA learning. That's really good, and hopefully you're interested in the channel. Now, you'll notice on this video, we've got a new setup here, and I should be able to show the new setup. There it is. We've got the new setup. This is what I'm looking at now with this new setup, and it's a bit different to the old setup. So we've made some sacrifices, you could say. You know, the quality of the camera is not quite as good, for example, but the real advantage of this setup is I can do videos really quickly, and hopefully we're going to be able to up the video output over the coming weeks and months. But I'm interested in what you think. What was your experience watching this video? Does it matter to you what the quality of the main camera is? And did you find that it was clear and you were able to learn? I'd really like to know what you think about this video. Okay, that's it. I'm Chris from Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions. Thanks for watching to the end, and I hope to see you in another video on the channel. Take care.